Yes, that is correct. As of the making of this video, the RX 6650 XT costs about the same as NVIDIA's lowest GPU in their current stack, the RTX 3050. The thing is, the 6650 XT performs on par with the 3050's bigger brother, the RTX 3060. So if you're looking to spend around $300 on a GPU to get you into some PC VR, here's what you can expect this offering from Team Red to provide. In Red Matter 2, I set the in-game resolution scale to 1.5 with indirect and dynamic shadows both on. In the Oculus PC app, I set the render resolution of my Quest 2 to 4704 by 2384 and the refresh rate to 72 Hz. And at these settings, the 6650 XT performed really well. The graphics were sharp and crisp, and the frame rate stayed at a constant 72 FPS. For all the tests in this video, I'm using an MSI RX 6650 XT Mech 2X OC with a Ryzen 7 5800X CPU and 32GB of 3600 MHz CL16 DDR4 RAM. The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners was another game I think the 6650 XT runs quite well. Just like with Red Matter 2, I set the render resolution in the Oculus app to 4704 by 2384 and the refresh rate to 72 Hz. In Saints and Sinners graphics options, I set the pixel density to 100%, the view distance to far, turned anti-aliasing off, and all other settings to high. Most of the time, this left us with a pretty good amount of performance headroom to spare, which tells me I very easily could have pushed things up a bit higher. But for whatever reason, this game likes to cut the frame rate in half whenever you're taking on walkers, so I decided to just leave things where I had them. Just FYI, this phenomenon is not unique to the 6650 XT. This happens in this game even on high-end graphics cards. I've tested this game with an RTX 3080 Ti and an RX 6950 XT, and whenever I fight walkers, the frame rate drops in half. This really isn't that big of a deal though, because even though the application is dropping frames when this happens, the compositor never does, so gameplay still feels smooth in these moments. When it comes to VR games, Vader Immortal is pretty easy to run. In this game, the 6650 XT was able to run at 4704 by 2384 at 90 Hz. Vader Immortal only has two options in its video settings, high and low, and as you probably guessed, I set it to high. As you can see from the performance graphs here, the 6650 XT was able to maintain a constant 90 FPS at these settings, giving us very smooth gameplay and nice, sharp graphics.
And death.
Another game that can run on even the most humble of VR-ready machines is Beat Saber. And the 6650 XT had no problem at all with this title. I once again set the render resolution to 4704 by 2384, but was able to up the refresh rate to 120 Hz. In Beat Saber's graphics settings, I set the render scale to 1.6, turned anti-aliasing off, and set all other options to their maximum values. To give the 6650 XT as much of a workout in this game as I could, I enlisted the help of my 15-year-old daughter, and she played through a handful of songs on Expert Plus. And as you can see, the 6650 XT was able to keep feeding her sharp, crisp-looking blocks at a very steady 120 FPS. Keeping our resolution and refresh rate the same, I then fired up Contractors. In the graphics options in Contractors, I set anti-aliasing to low and all the other settings to high. In this mod map from Call of Duty, the 6650 XT had no problem keeping the frame rate up around 120 FPS, and our performance headroom was regularly hovering around 60%. Switching over to Parking Lot, one of Contractors' more graphically intense maps, the 6650 XT continued to pump out frames with plenty of performance headroom still in the tank. There were a few small moments on this map where the performance headroom dropped almost all the way to zero, but those moments came and went so fast, if you blinked, you missed them. Dropping the refresh rate back down to 72 Hz, but keeping the render resolution at 4704 by 2384, Bone Lab ran great. In Bone Lab's graphics options, I first set the graphics to the high preset, then set MSAA to 1x, disabled SMAA, set the render scale to 1.0, the level of detail bias to 4.0, and foveated rendering to medium. This resulted in some sharp, crisp visuals, and the performance you see on screen now. A rock-solid 72 FPS, and just enough performance headroom left on tap for when you need it. Moving on to some of VR's more demanding titles, Lone Echo 2 is one of those games that, even at low settings, still looks good. Yeah, this is what this game looks like with the settings as low as they go. The list of settings for this game is a little long, so rather than go over them one by one, I'm just going to put them all on screen right now so you can see them. I did have to lower the render resolution a little from what we've been using in other games to get Lone Echo 2 to run at a constant 72 FPS. But at 4224 by 2128, the graphics still looked fairly sharp in the headset, which is always my primary objective when doing testing like this. I like my VR graphics as sharp and detailed as possible, and keeping the resolution high sometimes means having to run games at a lower refresh rate. But in my opinion, it's totally worth the trade-off. Fuzzy, blurry graphics in VR is just not enjoyable. Assetto Corsa is another game that has a butt-ton of settings you can tweak, so just like with Lone Echo 2, I'm going to just list them all on screen rather than go over them one by one. On the plus side, the 6650 XT was able to run this game at 4704 by 2384 at 72 Hz with almost all the settings maxed out. To keep our performance headroom just high enough to stay above 0, I had to turn the world detail down to very high from ultra and the shadow resolution to medium. Other than that, all the other graphic settings in this game were set to their maximum values. Yeah, this did push things pretty close to the edge, but in the end, the 6650 XT held in there and consistently delivered the 72 FPS I was targeting. Microsoft Flight Simulator is an absolute beast. This game chews up even the most powerful graphics cards and spits them out in a pile of steaming greenish yellow goo. For testing this game with the 6650 XT, I set the render resolution in the Oculus app to 2432 by 1216 and the refresh rate to 72 Hz. As for the VR graphics settings in Flight Simulator, I turned anti-aliasing off, set the render scaling to 100, along with the world scale, level of terrain detail, and objects level of detail. All the other options I set to their lowest value and turned off those that could be turned off. I like to first test in a training flight, and as you can see here, the 6650 XT actually didn't do all that bad. For the most part, the frame rate stayed right at 72 FPS. The graphics did look really pixelated though in the headset at these settings, so this wasn't really a result I was happy with. I next queued up a flight over New York City to really put the 6650 XT through its paces, and as I expected, this pushed our performance headroom below 0, and our frame rate was cut in half. As you can see in the performance overlay, the application was dropping about 100 frames every 3 seconds, but thankfully the compositor did not follow suit. It did exactly what it's supposed to do and kept delivering frames at regular intervals, so even though the frame rate was noticeably low, overall motion felt smooth. And now it's time for the one VR game I'm sure most of you watching this video are wondering about, Half Life Alyx. As I did for most of the games in this video, I set the resolution of my Quest 2 to 4704 by 2384 and the refresh rate to 72 Hz. In Half Life Alyx, I used the medium fidelity performance preset, and it not only played great on the 6650 XT, but looked fantastic as well. So what did you think? Did the 6650 XT live up to your expectations? Or were you hoping for more? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I know this is the part of the video where most of you are going to click away and leave, so I'm not going to stand in your way. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and have a good one.